the impact on the American household. Senator Lee will answer questions posed by Utahns, as well as have conversations with stakeholders with unique perspectives on the impact of what goes on here in Washington. For those of you listening over the phone, you are invited to participate and ask questions of the senator. You can do so by pressing *3 on your phone. For those of you viewing on Facebook, please feel free to leave questions in the comment section. Tonight's program will start with opening remarks from Senator Lee, followed by a look at the impact of inflation on groceries, home prices, and households. Then we'll open the phone lines to you. So with that, Senator Lee.
Thanks so much, Lee. Good evening, and thanks to all of you for joining us for tonight's event. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to hear directly from Utahns about things that are most important to them, as well as things that are impacting their day-to-day lives. Right now, one of the things that's unfortunately having a big and sadly very negative impact on Utahns' daily lives is inflation. For far too long, the federal government's been borrowing and then immediately spending money that it simply doesn't have. This is not just a problem for the future. We've known for a long time that it was that, but it's also worse than that. We're already feeling the consequences right now. So why is this the case? Well, politicians in Washington tend to vote for enormous, reckless spending packages, and they do so for short-term political gain and praise in the media. That comes quite predictably. But it's the people, the hardworking families in Utah and elsewhere across America who are forced to pay the price. They are the ones, you're the ones getting the brunt of it through inflation that's making day-to-day life more expensive. And more than anyone, it tends to be the poor and middle class who are hit the hardest. Every day, it's getting more expensive to fill cupboards, refrigerators, and bellies. Every day, it's getting more expensive to buy gas, to drive to work, to the doctor, or to just drive your kids to school. Every day, it's getting harder to buy a house, to buy a car, or to pay for the heat and air conditioning in your home. To give just a few specific examples, gasoline prices are up over 50% from last year. Chicken prices are soaring. In fact, boneless, skinless chicken breast is trading at $2 per pound compared to $1.30 per pound that it's averaged over the last decade. Some packages of diapers that have typically in recent years cost about $25 now cost around $40, and there are fewer diapers inside each package. And we in Utah are certainly feeling the pinch. According to a recent survey, 85% of Utahns are worried about inflation. Unfortunately, the infrastructure package that Democrats are currently trying to ram through Congress is more than anything a big, huge, multi-trillion-dollar inflation bomb. So far, we haven't seen text. We haven't seen estimates about how much the bill will cost. And for that matter, we haven't even seen what Democrats in the White House would like to have in the bill. But recent estimates suggest that this is a bill that's going to spend around $4 trillion. The last thing we need for our already frightening inflation. It's just taking a bad situation and making a lot worse. In fact, this type of legislation has the potential to carry out a sort of reverse Robin Hood mission. That is a mission in which we rob the poor to give to the rich. A small handful of people will, make no mistake, get very rich off of bills like this. And then a small handful of other Americans who are well off will figure out a way to not be adversely affected by it. But most people, including poor and middle class Americans, many of whom live paycheck to paycheck, will be most hurt, as they will be the very ones to feel their paychecks getting stretched thinner and thinner each week. On top of that, this package would serve to have negative consequences for the actual infrastructure projects themselves. Implementing federal control over state and local infrastructure only means more expensive, more burdensome, and more costly projects. We already have a lot of evidence of this from the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Signed into law in 1970, NEPA was intended to account for the environmental consequences of proposed federal actions and projects. And in many respects, it's had this effect. But over the last 50 years, it's deviated in substantial ways from its original purpose and turned into a complex, bureaucratic, Byzantine labyrinth of regulations that dramatically increase the cost and the timeline for desperately needed projects, hurting countless businesses, employees, and consumers. Now, look, if we're going to have reckless spending forced on us like this, under the guise of infrastructure, and at the very least, we've got to address the burdens and the costs imposed on federal infrastructure projects through NEPA regulations. So I look forward to talking to Utahns tonight about these and so many other issues that we're facing today.
Thank you, Senator. Reminder, if you're listening in and would like to participate in the broadcast later on, please press *3. For those of you watching via Facebook, feel free to leave questions in the comments section. We'll now introduce Dave Davis, president of the Utah Food Industry Association. Mr. Davis has been with the association for over a dozen years, and in this capacity has witnessed how even small fluctuations in the market can greatly disrupt how products are bought and sold in Utah. Mr. Davis?
It's good to be with you, and Senator, it's good to see you. You have alluded
Likewise.
to the you have alluded to the fact that we seem to be experiencing the front end of runaway inflation, and I would just speak on behalf of those businesses out there that are providing the groceries to our consumers. There's been $2.5 trillion dumped into the economy, and it sounds like there's another $500 billion package that's being considered right now, with another $3 trillion being considered in the future. And I guess my message to you and the people back in Washington is this affects real Americans back here in Utah. It's having the effect of increasing the price of eggs, the price of bread. It feels like the federal government is pouring gasoline on what is a smoldering fire at this point. So I guess the question that I have is there any hope of reining in this federal spending that is causing at least a partial cause of this inflationary pressure?
Yeah, great question, David. I'm glad that you were able to paint a real fine point on that, about the way people experience this. The short answer to your question is yes, there is some hope for reining it in. The question is, how much misery will we have to endure before we get to that point? My fear, Dave, is that we could quickly get to the point where reining in federal spending becomes an obligation. It becomes forced on us. That we'll do it not because we've compelled ourselves to be humble and to be more careful, but because we'll be compelled by our circumstances to do it. We'll be acted upon rather than acting. That's never a great position to be in. What I mean by that is, at the rate that we're spending, this really is unsustainable. We very quickly now could get to the point where if interest rates, if the Treasury yield rates, the rate on which we have to pay those who purchase U.S. Treasury, if those rates start to go up even close to their historical average, we will almost overnight, certainly within a year or two, go from spending $300 or $400 billion a year as an interest payment on our national debt to over $1 trillion a year on our national debt. That's unsustainable. That won't work. And at that point, we'll have no choice but to undertake massive, abrupt, painful, draconian cuts that will disproportionately, adversely affect poor middle-class Americans. So look, my hope is that we'll realize this is an opportunity. That as we're starting to feel in real time the inflationary effects of this reckless, out-of-control spending, will start to make decisions in Washington not to do it. The problem we've got is that over time, elected officials in Washington have gotten accustomed to being to getting excessive praise from the media and otherwise when they spend a lot of money. That's where the people make the difference. The people who are now experiencing in real time the pain that comes from that will be key in helping to send the message to people in Washington, D.C. We've got to stop it, because it really is perversely hurting America's poor and middle class to their great detriment, and in some cases to the detriment of a small handful of wealthy and well-connected people who figure out a way to make money on it. And that's very wrong. So Dave, I'd ask you then, in your industry, you have an opportunity to see things like this in real time. How is this different than you've seen other price increases over the last few years? In the course of your career, have you ever seen anything quite like this, with this abrupt of an increase in consumer prices on things like groceries?
I think that, Senator, you put your finger on it. The change has been so abrupt. Sometimes you will see in the market some cyclical changes, but this seems to be a fairly abrupt change and a very significant one. You referenced the cost of a chicken breast. You've seen the price of pork. And many consumers may think, well, as a business, can't you just absorb this new cost? You have to remember, in the grocery business in particular, you're talking about razor thin margins, typically around 1 or 1.5%. There is no room to absorb these inflationary changes, and they will be passed on to the consumers, which means people, especially at the middle and lower end of the income scale, that spend a disproportionate amount of their income on staples like groceries are going to be hurt the worst.
Right. So it's those folks, people, poor middle class Americans who are working paycheck to paycheck. They spend, as you put it, a disproportionately large share of their income on groceries. So it's less of a margin, and they're purchasing from people who grocers who have very narrow margins to begin with. There's no room to simply absorb it and write it off as a cost of doing business. In order to survive, they're necessarily going to have to increase prices. And yet that seems to be the natural outcome of what happens when we just print more money, which is kind of what we're doing. Technically, we're borrowing it, but with an entity as big as the United States, with as much of a borrowing capacity as the United States, it has the effect of just printing more money. One of my favorite colleagues in the Senate, Cynthia Lummis, senator from Wyoming, recently told me that within the last 18 months, we've seen that about 37% of all U.S. dollars that have ever been printed, that have ever come into existence, have come into existence over the last 18 months. That's frightening, especially when you consider the fact that you don't those same dollars have increased dramatically in circulation. And yet you don't have an increase in the number of products that those things can purchase. If anything, you have fewer because you had reduced productivity during COVID. We've seen this massive influx of new dollars that the federal government is effectively just printing, going into circulation. What that means is everything's more expensive. That really hurts people living paycheck to paycheck because their paychecks aren't any bigger. They just purchase less.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next, Senator Lee will be joined by Utah County Commissioner Amelia Gardner to discuss the impact of inflation and other economic factors on the cost of housing. Mrs. Gardner, thank you for joining this Access Live event. What are you seeing when you look at the impact of inflation on housing costs?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much people know about what's going on with housing right here in Utah County, but we are in the midst of a serious housing crisis. Housing prices have gone up so much that our local community are being priced out of housing. I get messages on probably a weekly basis from people that say, I've been renting the same house for 2 years. I've never been late on my rent. And my landlord just sold the house. I have 30 days to move, and I can't find anything in my price range in the county. This is becoming more common. The rents have gone up significantly, and families can't purchase homes because the price of houses has gone up 30% in the last year. And on top of that, the asking prices are not what the houses are selling for. They're selling for $50,000 to $100,000 above asking price, cash offers. So we're really in the thick of a serious housing crisis, and that inflation goes across the board. When I talk to small business owners and entrepreneurs, the number one issue they're facing is their workforce is having a ton of wage pressure. Everyone who's worked for them needs a 10% raise to be able to afford to live here, if they can find a place to live. And so this is really just starting to take what was a budding housing crisis and make it into a huge, huge wildfire for us.
Commissioner Gardner, you've got a lot of good insights as an elected official and public servant. You're someone who interacts with people on a day-to-day basis. You're someone who cares deeply about your community. Is this something that you see changing anytime soon? And if it is going to change, what will bring about that change?
I think the biggest thing that can bring about change, I don't see it changing anytime soon right now, because Utah County is continuing to grow. We grew 3% in 2020. In the middle of a pandemic, our population grew by 3%. We are continuing to grow. This year, we're growing at a more rapid rate than we were last year. About 60% of that growth is organic growth, and 40% is people moving in from out of state. And that's just increasing. We are continuing to grow, and as we do, we don't have inventory of homes. We don't have enough apartments for low-income housing. We don't have enough townhouses and starter homes for families just starting out. All the way through the spectrum, we don't have enough million-dollar homes for the people moving here from out of state that are coming here to escape the state that they're in. Unless we get more inventory, I don't see this slowing down anytime soon, which means that we're going to continue to have wage pressures, and it's going to affect our economy. We're booming right now. We have like a 2.3% unemployment rate in Utah County, one of the best in the state, one of the best in the nation. But entrepreneurs are telling me if they hire people, the people don't have anywhere to live. We actually have a manufacturing plant that is starting to purchase land and build townhomes so that they have a place to house employees, which really is reminiscent of the Great Depression to me.
Anything else you can think of that could change the inventory? Some of this attributable perhaps to the lack of availability of land because the federal government owns 2/3 of the land in our state.
That's actually what I was going to get to. I actually had two questions I wanted to ask you, and that was one of them. Is it's access to land. A lot of Utah County is either farmland or it's already being used unless it belongs to the federal government. There are large swaths of land that belong to the Forest Service. We're right up against the mountains, or the BLM. On the west side, on the west side of Utah Lake, or the western part of our land, a lot of that land is BLM. And that land from the BLM is abutting right up against cities where people could build townhouses. They could build more homes. So the federal land is a challenge for us. It's really stifling the growth of our cities. So that's inventory. So that was one question I wanted to ask you. Maybe you can give us your thoughts on that, and then I'll ask you my other question.
Yeah, I've long believed that the presence of federal land in our state, in many ways is an asset when you look at things like Arches National Park, when you look at our national parks, our national monuments, declared wilderness areas, things like that are great for people to visit. But most of our federal public land doesn't fit into one of those categories. And including most of the land that you're describing, there's a lot of it that is actually found within city limits or immediately outside of city limits. And so I'm always on the lookout for federal lands that meet that description, don't fit into any environmentally protected status, don't necessarily fall in the category of something likely to become a national park, is within or very near city limits and could be inhabited, could be used to build affordable housing on. There are a number of ways that we could free up some of that land. There's legislation already on the books called the Recreation and Public Purposes Act that allows for a certain number of acres to be disposed of by the federal government every year. I believe that could and should be expanded to deal specifically with affordable housing.
Yeah, I think that would be a fantastic solution. We actually have money available for affordable housing, but we don't have a lot of places to put that affordable housing. So getting some federal land to do that would be great. You know, when people think about this, a lot of times they're saying, well, I don't want there to be more inventory of houses because I don't want people to move in from out of state. But what we're finding is that the people from out of state, they're going to move here regardless. They're going to come no matter what. And what we're building these houses for is our children. If we don't build these affordable housing, if we don't get this land, our children are going to have to leave. They're going to become constituents of Senator Lummis. They're going to be moving to Wyoming because that's where the land is cheaper, right? When we'd like to keep them here, we'd like to keep them home. We'd like to keep them constituents of you, Senator. My other question is, speaking of federal land and the amount of federal land we have in our county, I don't think PILT payments adjust for inflation. And as we hit this inflation, the cost of county government is going to go up with inflation. And the payments that we receive from the federal government, I know PILT is payment in lieu of taxes. We like to call it pennies in lieu of taxes here in Utah County. It doesn't adjust for inflation. Is there anything that we can do to address that?
Yeah, there is. Thanks for asking about that, Commissioner Gardner. In fact, I've got legislation called the More PILT Act that would require us to pay more money. And as the name implies, it would result in larger payments. As much as anything, as important as anything, this legislation would require us to conduct an inventory of the federal land that we own, to conduct a valuation of it, patterned much after legislation moved through our own state legislature that has resulted in our own land valuation. The federal government needs its own official valuation of the portfolio of lands that it owns. One of the reasons for that is we need to be able to estimate the actual property tax assessment value so that they can pay something approximating and approaching what any other owner would pay in lieu of taxes, meaning what they would pay if in fact they were taxed up. Right now, the way we have the situation set up, federal land-rich states like Utah are subsidizing all other Americans and the interest they may have in having a lot of federal land. It's fine if we want to have some federal land in our state, but we ought not be paying for whatever benefit New Yorkers and Michiganders feel from having a lot of federal land in our state. They ought to pay along with that as well. And the More PILT Act would require that evaluation and would entitle you as a county to collect more revenue from the federal government as a result of that ownership.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Commissioner. We'll now be joined by Box Elder County resident Jamie Munns. Jamie is a mother of 4, responsible for running not only the economy of her household, but also of a small business. Jamie, what's your question for the Senator?
So I just have a little bit going on with my family. We have a college student. My oldest is a college student. My youngest has some severe medical needs. And so in our household, we see increases in the cost of schooling, and we see increases in the cost of medical. And unfortunately, being self-employed, we ran the risk of either going bankrupt or it financially breaking us or going to the exchanges. So I've seen how government intervention can also create some unintended consequences. And then on the building or on the business end, we're seeing increase in goods, just as Dave was saying with foods. We're seeing, my husband drives a truck, and so we have a trucking company. And so the cost of fuel increasing is increasing our business costs, as well as my own business, my cost of goods. All my vendors have told me that to expect an increase in goods that I would sell. With my daughter, she's worked her whole high school career. She worked to get a 4.0 to have an academic scholarship, and her college is based on whether or not she can qualify through FAFSA, and it doesn't take into account the medical debt that we have. And so right now, we maybe feel like we're in a position of where we're being penalized by policy for our successes, and our situations are being exacerbated by those policies as well. What do we have as in terms of families? Where's the relief? Not in terms of, can we have a a spending intervention on Washington instead of Washington intervention on us.
Jamie, that's a great point, and thank you for sharing your personal example there. That really is tragic. It's one of the tragic, avoidable, and entirely foreseeable consequences of excessive federal intervention. You mentioned first the government intervention in the healthcare system, which, by the way, has been a really good deal for a really big health insurance company, who in the first few years of Obamacare's existence alone saw their profits roughly double in just a very short period of time. It was really good for the big, ultra-consolidated healthcare giant. It was really bad for the healthcare consumer, who saw prices soar, saw premiums increase, deductibles increase, and coverage options more limited. Then you compound that by this fact. So you're saying that the FAFSA form and the application process will take into account assets and income, but doesn't contain an offset for the substantial medical bills and the medical-related debt accumulated through that. That's another oversight and another bad thing associated with having the federal government commandeer the entire student loan financing industry that ought to be able to take that into account. So I appreciate you sharing that data point, and I'm happy to look into that further and figure out whether there's something we can do there.
Thank you.
Outstanding. We'll now segue into the portion of tonight's Access Live where we open the phone lines and connect you directly with Senator Lee. A reminder, if you are on the call and want to ask a question, simply press *3. If you're watching at home via Facebook, please feel free to leave a question in the comments section. We'll take as many questions as possible through the duration of the broadcast, and we'll start with a call from Cache County. Dustin has a question about the National Guard.
Hi, Dustin.
Of course not. Of course not. I really don't want somebody to come back and say, "Why in the front do you have a Hello?
Dustin, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I was distracted. I'm in the office. I had a really fast question for you. Currently, the National Guard for the United States is owed around $520 million by the federal government, and without funding, the Guard it's unable to have training. It's unable to have very basic maintenance issues. The information that I have on it is that the Senate was told in several memos back in May that this was going to be an issue, and there's a total of 12 states that this is going to be a big funding pitfall. I know that the Utah National Guard has around 7,000 people, and I was just wondering what you know about that situation and if you have any solution, because the funding needed to happen on the 1st of this month for the shortfall essentially to be fixed.
Yeah, Dustin, thank you for raising this issue. I've been kept apprised of this, not only by my own team, but also by our outstanding Adjutant General in Utah, General Turley, has routinely kept me informed of the situation and where it's going. I just reached out to him a little while ago today, in fact, just in the last hour or two, to let him know we will be passing out of the Senate probably in the next 24 hours a supplemental emergency appropriations measure to pay the National Guard for its service so that those funds will be backfilled and you'll be able to do what you need to do. Thanks for raising that question. This is an important one, but it looks like we will have it taken care of within the next 24 hours.
Our next question comes from Ms. Fawn, calling from Fillmore, a question regarding inflation. Fawn, you're on with the Senator.
Yes, I would like to know what we as citizens and you as our Senator can do about the runaway inflation. I feel like that the first thing Joe Biden did was to stop the pipeline, and that took away thousands of good-paying jobs, and we are just left holding the bag. And what can we do about it?
Fawn, thanks for raising that concern. You're right to have it. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. There is an answer. And the answer is that we've got to stop instinctively, reflexively thinking of the federal government as the source of solutions. When problems arise, we can't just assume that federal money is the answer. We've been doing this for a long time. And you're right, our current president has done that. Unfortunately, he's not the first president who has done that. We've had Senates, Houses of Representatives, and White Houses of every conceivable partisan combination over the course of not just years, but decades and generations who have done that. Now, it's reached a fever pitch over the last 18 months. It's gotten so much worse than I've ever seen it before. And that's why we're finally starting to see, almost in real time, the consequences of that. So, Fawn, the only thing we can do at this point to stop it is to stop doing what's causing it. Doesn't mean we can turn it around immediately, because a lot of these dollars are out there. We've printed them, we've circulated them. Some of them are still in the process of being released for spending. But the least we can do is to stop. What we're doing. You know, it reminds me of a time when I was in about 8th or 9th grade. I was with my family. My family was out running errands, and I had homework to do. And I asked my parents if they'd drop me off so that I could go do my homework. And I stepped out of the car, just outside the curb. My late father, he's a good man, but he was sometimes sort of an absent-minded professor. He started driving off before I was fully out of the car. He ran over my foot, which was turned around backwards and underneath the car. And, you know, old Oldsmobile with a whole bunch of kids in it and my parents, I was in pain. I started grunting and groaning, and first thing I could think of to say was, "Dad, put it in reverse." Reverse. That was the only word I could utter. He turned the car around and got it off the foot, which miraculously wasn't broken. Had he remained on it much longer, I'm sure it would have been. The point is, sometimes you have to stop doing what you're in the process of doing, lest you make things worse. We've got to stop the excessive spending right now, which I think means Congress needs to get back to focusing on that which only Congress can do and that which Congress is unambiguously authorized to do, things that involve providing for our national defense, basic powers outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Outside of those things that are essential to our national security and that are essential to the things that only the federal government can do, we need the federal government to stop having the ability to pretend to do simply by throwing more money at it. And yes, I think that means we cannot afford to spend this $4 trillion that the Democrats want to throw at what they're loosely calling infrastructure. And then moving forward, we've simply got to spend less. This is not a call for austerity. This is a call for prosperity. But in order for prosperity to prevail, we've got to stop stealing from the poor to give it to the rich, which is exactly what we're doing every time we spend trillions of dollars at a time we don't have. Look, at the end of the day, this really is about stroking the egos of politicians who get praise every time they spend money we don't have. As soon as they start getting criticism instead of praise for that, as soon as they start seeing firsthand that this is harming those that they're supposed to be helping, things are going to start to get better.
We'll next move to Roy, Utah. A question from Eve about the debt ceiling. Eve, you're on with Senator Lee.
Thank you for taking my call. I wondered if there isn't a way to not raise the debt ceiling. If we don't fund all this irresponsible spending the Democrats seem inclined to do, how can they do? They can't spend it, can they? So why are we even considering raising the debt ceiling?
Great question, Eve. I appreciate you raising that. This is something that I've been talking about during the entire 10.5-year period I've been in Washington, D.C. Every so often, we reach the limit of our current borrowing authority, and Congress has to figure out what to do next. One of the few controls that we have on that is the debt limit. over time, Congress went a few years ago from raising the debt ceiling by a specified dollar amount. You know, $500 billion here, $2 trillion there. And then we'd wait until that amount was spent, and then we'd have to go back and address it again. In the last few years, Congress, against my opposition, has started just declaring debt ceiling holidays, where there was no limit to what you could spend outside the debt limit during that period. It was like a debt ceiling Mardi Gras. This has been disastrous, and it's what facilitated the spending of between, I don't know, $2.5 and $3 trillion more than we brought in the last year alone. So, look, at the end of the day, when the debt ceiling approaches, and this debt ceiling holiday that we're approaching is set to expire at midnight on July 31st. Now, after that period, there are a few weeks where they can use what are known as extraordinary measures to backfill things for a few weeks, but we're still going to have to address it. In many circumstances, once you're at that moment, it still can be necessary to provide some accommodation for increased borrowing authority so that you can continue to fund what you've already agreed to fund. But I don't believe we should do it without some type of structural spending reform attached to it. Some type of spending measure requiring the passage of a balanced budget amendment or limiting the amount of money that Congress can spend in any given year as a percentage of GDP. My friend Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, has recently introduced legislation that he believes should accompany the passage of any debt ceiling increase or extension that would require a specific vote on ways that we could reduce federal spending. There are myriad ways in which we could couple a debt ceiling extension or increase with structural spending reform, but we do have to have it. So thanks for asking that question, Eve. I appreciate the insight.
For those of you listening at home who would like to pose a question to the senator during this Access Live event, remember, press *3. Also, the senator sends out weekly newsletters. If you'd like to be added to the list of recipients of that newsletter, press *6 to communicate your information. This next question comes via video submission and was submitted by Chris De Herrera, the president and CEO of the Utah chapter of Associated Builders and Contractors.
President Biden's recent proposal on immigration reform seeks to create a pathway to citizenship for more than 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. ABC and industry is concerned that the Biden's proposal largely ignores the drivers of illegal immigration and the enforcement needed to prevent the circumvention of our nation's borders and immigration laws over the coming years. It is critical, and we ask, Senator, that our comprehensive immigration reform includes necessary improvements to our country's visa system that anticipates the future flow of immigrants into the United States, and also providing employers with a flexible visa system that allows sufficient access to permanent and temporary foreign workers must be included in any final proposal to fix our system. This would allow us to better address the needs of the nation's growing economy while providing jobs through legal avenues and discouraging illegal immigration.
Thanks for your input on that. That's very good to know your position there. Yeah, I mean, you're right. We've got to be very careful on how we handle these things to make sure that we're dealing with the root causes of illegal immigration. We are a nation of immigrants. We have been since our founding. I hope that we always will be, because the American dream is something that's helped, literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. Most of us are ourselves either immigrants or the descendants thereof. But for that to be a reality, for us to be able to continue being a nation of immigrants, a place where you can come in poverty or be born into poverty and have the reasonable hope and expectation that one day you can retire comfortably, we have to make sure that they come through the front door and not the back door. And yeah, our visa system, you're exactly right, it's messed up. I often refer to it as our antiquated Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly era immigration code. It's messed up. It needs a lot of adjustment. To that end, I've started to take the position that we're to really reform our immigration system, we're going to have to start doing so in bite-sized pieces of legislation, incremental legislation that can reform our immigration code bit by bit, step by step. What has caused immigration reform proposals to fail in recent years is the fact that once an immigration proposal is rendered comprehensive, once people decide you can't pass anything unless you can pass everything, Congress ends up choking on it. There are some partisan choke points that end up causing most of these bills to stall out if you try to do it all in one piece of legislation. One of the reasons why I've started pushing smaller, more targeted legislation, with some success in the narrow areas. I passed a very significant reform through the Senate after working on it for roughly 10 years at the end of the last Congress. We passed the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act. This thing was difficult to push forward at every stage. We finally passed it out unanimously last year. Sadly, the House of Representatives didn't take it up for a vote, and so it didn't pass. This is an example of the kind of thing that can happen, where we focus on one issue area at a time rather than trying to solve the whole problem at one time. As far as those who are here unlawfully, look, there are ways that we can get to the point where we can deal with those here unlawfully already with dignity and respect and compassion, particularly taking into account the special circumstances associated with those who were brought here as infants or young children with no volition of their own to come here. In order for that to work, we also have to take steps to protect the border, to make sure that the border is secure, to make sure that we're not just opening the floodgates and saying anyone can cross the border. In order to have the political wherewithal to get the votes to do that, we need to secure the border. And so, yeah, incremental, step by step is the key, as is the need to secure the border. We can get there, but we've got to do it in the right order, the right sequence.
Next question comes from Hurricane, Utah, and is posed by Jennifer regarding the drought. Jennifer, you are on with Senator Lee.
You there, Jennifer?
We'll move on from Jennifer and go now to Mayfield. Patricia calls with a question regarding water shortages.
Hello.
Patricia, you're on with the senator.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Yes, hi. I also agree in a small government and limited spending, but in central Utah, in Sanpete County, specifically Mayfield, we have a severe water shortage and distribution problems. We send a lot of water that come through our canyon out to Delta and other areas, but our farmers are always short of water, and they have been limiting our ability to water our lawns. Right now, they say once every 2 weeks you can water, and it happens year after year, year after year. And I know that there's a drought going on, but I also know that we have a water storage problem. I've been told that we had reservoirs that were considered not sufficient, and they were taken away from us, and nothing replaced them. I was wondering, who do we turn to get help for these problems? Because in Mayfield, we only have a small community. It is growing, but it's less than 1,000 people.
Yeah. Patricia, this is a very timely topic, especially in light of the drought. In fact, just yesterday, I was in a hearing. I sit on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and I had the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, in front of the committee. I asked her specifically about what we can do about water storage infrastructure. Water storage infrastructure is absolutely essential, especially to a dry desert state with lots of federal land like Utah. We can't do anything without it. One of the reasons why a lot of these projects end up getting stalled out is because of NEPA problems. The obligations imposed by NEPA often make it very, very difficult to complete these water infrastructure projects. One of the reasons why I've introduced reform legislation called the Unshackle Act. The Unshackle Act would streamline the NEPA process, preserving the environmental benefits attached to that law, but forcing government agencies to act within a set specified period of time. We're putting a shot clock on top of the NEPA process to make sure that projects like that get finished. It's especially important in this area because when we've got a lot of federal land and we've got a drought, increased water storage infrastructure may well be the only thing we can rely on. So we'll keep pushing on those fronts, and thank you for raising that important issue.
This concludes the question and answer portion of tonight's Access Live event. If you would like to hear more about what the senator feels about various topics and submit questions, please press *6 on your phone, enter your email address there, and we'll be in touch. Also, follow along online at lee.senate.gov, where announcements about future Access Live events will be made. And with that, I'll turn the remaining moments over to Senator Lee for closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Lee. Thanks to all of you for joining us on a perfectly good Wednesday evening where you could have plenty of other options. I'm glad you joined us. I'm also grateful to Dave and Amelia and Jamie for joining us tonight, and to all those who have listened or called in. Tonight, we've gone through the process of painting a picture of the burdens imposed on employers and households and families, thanks to runaway, reckless spending by the federal government, spending that turns into inflation. Now, we've heard about the real world trickle-down effects that flow into our states and our local governments, transportation systems, and communities. And they're not a problem of the distant future. They're not something that just might arise at some unknown point. They're here now, and they're affecting so many aspects of our daily lives right here, right now. At the end of the day, government is not the one hurt by massive, reckless spending packages like the one now being proposed by the Democrats. The government does not feel the sting of inflation. The people do. The government doesn't go hungry at the end of the month. The government doesn't worry about paying rent when the kids need braces. The government isn't forced to choose between buying groceries and paying medical bills. The government doesn't forego family reunions when it's time to tighten the belt. Taxpayers do. Families do. People do. The out-of-control spending must stop. The inflation bomb is here, and it's exploding. And hardworking Utahns and Americans can't afford it. So, look, we're in tough times. I remain convinced as ever that our best days remain yet ahead of us. We're great as a country, not because of who we are, but because of what we do. Ultimately, we will choose freedom over captivity, but we've got to choose that. Because right now, we're choosing to render ourselves more and more the captives of the federal government, which every time it passes a big spending package may help a small handful of wealthy and well-connected people. And it might bring momentary praise and adulation to a small handful of craven politicians. But it's harming poor and middle-class Americans. It's got to stop. Thank you very much.